My family abandoned me when my industrial tech startup was failing, mocking my struggles for years. When they invited me to Thanksgiving just to brag about a mansion they couldn't afford, I casually dropped my $160 million acquisition, shattering their reality forever. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The mahogany table in the boardroom felt cold against my palms. I pressed my hands flat against the polished wood, trying to ground myself, trying to stop the slight tremor in my fingers. Across from me, 3 lawyers in sharp, tailored suits were neatly stacking piles of documents into thick leather folders. The lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a reassuring smile, slid the final signature page toward me. "Just one more here, Aubrey," he said softly, tapping a heavy, gold-plated pen against the dotted line. "And it's officially done." I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy, a physical manifestation of the last 12 years of my life. 12 years of missed sleep, of panic attacks in the server room, of surviving on stale coffee and sheer, stubborn willpower. I signed my name. "Congratulations," the attorney said, extending his hand. "The acquisition is complete. The transfer of $160 million has been initiated to your private accounts. You've earned this rest." I shook his hand, but my body felt entirely hollowed out. The physical toll of the last few months, the endless negotiations with the acquiring conglomerate, the grueling due diligence, the absolute secrecy required, had left me violently exhausted. My stomach churned with a mixture of profound relief and a strange, lingering nausea. I was 38 years old, and I was suddenly, unfathomably wealthy. I walked out of the towering glass building and into the crisp autumn air, my mind completely blank. I just wanted to go to my quiet, modest apartment, crawl into bed, and sleep for a week. But as I unlocked my car, my phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. I pulled it out, squinting at the harsh glare of the screen. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen on my phone in nearly 11 months. Robert, my father. My thumb hovered over the red decline button. Every instinct in my battered, exhausted nervous system screamed at me to ignore it. But a masochistic curiosity, a remnant of the little girl who just wanted her dad's approval, took over. I swiped the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice raspy from a lack of sleep. "Aubrey," Robert's voice boomed through the speaker, crisp, commanding, and entirely devoid of warmth. There was no, "How are you?" No, "It's been a while." He spoke as if he were addressing a subordinate who was already late for a shift. "I expect you in Connecticut next Thursday, 4 o'clock sharp." I leaned against the steering wheel, closing my eyes. "Next Thursday, Dad, that's Thanksgiving." "I am aware of what day it is, Aubrey," he snapped, exasperation already bleeding into his tone. "Your mother and I are making a point to include you this year. Melanie and Aiden have just closed on a spectacular new property. An estate, really. They are hosting, and it is a major milestone for the family. You will be there to show your support." The word include hit me like a physical blow. For the past 3 years, my invitations to family holidays had mysteriously vanished. There was always an excuse. "We thought you were too busy with your little computer hobby," or "Aiden's family took up all the guest rooms." I had spent the last 3 Christmases and Thanksgivings eating takeout alone, staring at the walls of my apartment while my family posted photos of lavish, catered dinners. "Dad, I'm really not feeling well," I stammered, the exhaustion suddenly crushing me. "I've had a massive week at work. I don't think I can make the drive." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line. When Robert spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, enunciating every syllable. "Your sister has achieved something remarkable. She and Aiden are building a legacy. We have tolerated your eccentricities and your refusal to get a real job for over a decade. You have embarrassed this family enough with your stubbornness. You will not disrespect your sister's success by pouting in the city. You will show up, you will be pleasant, and you will clap for her. Do I make myself clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the call-ended screen. I was sitting in a parking garage, holding a piece of plastic in my hand, having just secured a 9-figure payout, and yet I felt exactly like the worthless, invisible teenager I used to be. The realization washed over me, cold and suffocating. They didn't want me there to celebrate. They wanted me there as an audience. They wanted me there to serve as the baseline of failure against which Melanie could measure her glittering success. The betrayal was worse than the exhaustion itself. I sat in my car for a full 20 minutes, unable to turn the key in the ignition. My chest felt tight, a familiar, phantom ache radiating through my ribs. It was the exact same ache I used to get when I was 25, sitting at the family dinner table, listening to Robert praise Melanie's promotion at her boutique interior design firm while explicitly ignoring my attempts to explain the industrial safety software I was coding. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text message illuminated the screen. "Melanie, Dad said you're coming next week. Address is below. It's a gated community, so you'll need to give the guard your name. Please make sure your car is washed so it doesn't leave oil on the new pavers. And Aubrey, please wear something appropriate. No steel-toe boots or whatever it is you wear to those construction sites. We are having the event catered by a Michelin star chef." I stared at the screen, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping my throat. Steel-toe boots. She was referring to the specialized, heavy-duty software integration I had built over the last decade. My company didn't make consumer apps or fun little video games. I had designed a predictive safety algorithm for heavy machinery used in large-scale industrial environments. I spent years on site at massive hydro dams in the Pacific Northwest and towering crane operations in urban centers, testing sensors and writing code that actively prevented structural failures and saved lives. It was gritty, unglamorous, highly technical work, and it was highly, astronomically lucrative. To Melanie, I was just a glorified mechanic who played with computers in the mud. I typed out a quick, neutral reply, "Understood. See you Thursday." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and finally started the engine. As I navigated the city traffic toward my apartment, my mind began to replay the last decade of interactions with my family. Every condescending remark, every eye roll when I mentioned my business, every accidental exclusion from family group chats. They had systematically frozen me out, treating me like a contagion of failure that might infect Melanie's pristine, Instagram-perfect life. When I finally arrived at my apartment, a modest 2-bedroom place I had rented for 6 years and never bothered to upgrade because I was never home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I didn't turn on the lights. The city street lamps cast long, distorted shadows across the ceiling. My laptop sat on the coffee table. I reached out, pulled it onto my lap, and opened it. The screen glowing brightly in the dark room, I logged into my secure banking portal. There it was. Available balance, $160 million. The commas looked absurd. The zeros looked fake. It was more money than Robert had made in his entire corporate career. It was more money than Melanie and Aiden could ever hope to see in 10 lifetimes. I ran my fingers over the trackpad, my earlier exhaustion slowly melting away, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. For years, I had accepted their narrative. I had accepted the role of the disappointing, eccentric sister who was always struggling to make ends meet. I had hidden my minor successes, downplayed my growing client list, and kept my head down because I knew any success I had would be instantly diminished by my father to protect Melanie's ego. They wanted me to come to Thanksgiving. They wanted the impoverished, struggling Aubrey to sit at their massive new table, eat their Michelin-starred food, and marvel at their immense wealth. They wanted me to feel small. I closed the laptop with a soft, decisive click. The shadows in the room seemed to settle. A strange, serene calm washed over my frayed nerves. I would go. I would wash my car, I would wear a nice dress, and I would sit at their table. I would let them preen and boast and belittle me. I would play the exact role they had cast me in for my entire life. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. The drive to Connecticut the following Thursday took 3 hours. I spent the entire time in absolute silence, letting the hum of the tires on the highway drown out the anxiety that usually accompanied family gatherings. As I drove, my mind drifted back to the defining moment of our family dynamic, the moment I realized exactly where I stood. It was 8 years ago. I was 30 years old, and my startup was on the verge of total collapse. I had secured a massive contract to install my predictive safety software at a major hydro dam project, but the upfront hardware costs were staggering. I was out of capital. I had maxed out my credit cards, drained my savings, and was sleeping on a cot in my rented office space. I needed a bridge loan of $15,000 to cover payroll for my 2 engineers, or the company would fold. Desperate, terrified, and swallowing every ounce of my pride, I had driven to my parents' house. It was a Sunday evening. Robert, Julia, Melanie, and her new husband, Aiden, were all sitting in the living room, drinking expensive wine. I remember the exact feeling of the plush carpet under my worn-out sneakers as I stood before them and laid out my business plan. I showed them the contracts. I showed them the projected revenue. I begged, openly and honestly, for a $15,000 loan, promising to pay it back with interest in 6 months. Robert had simply sighed, setting his wine glass down with a heavy clink. "Aubrey," he had said, using that same disappointed, corporate tone he used on the phone last week. "We are not a bank, and frankly, this venture of yours is a sinking ship. You need to cut your losses, update your resume, and get a stable job in it." "Dad, I have the contract," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I just need the cash flow to build the sensors. This software will revolutionize industrial safety. It's real." "It's a fantasy," Melanie had chimed in from the velvet armchair. She was swirling her wine, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the light. "You're 30, Obbs. It's time to grow up. You can't keep playing entrepreneur forever. It's embarrassing." But the worst part wasn't the rejection. The worst part was Aiden. Aiden was a newly minted wealth management consultant, a title that, as far as I could tell, meant he played golf on Tuesdays and used the word synergy without irony. He was slick, too slick. He wore suits that were slightly too tailored, smiled with perfectly bleached teeth, and had an unsettling habit of assessing the monetary value of everything in a room with his eyes. Aiden had leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, projecting an aura of false sympathy. "Aubrey, listen to me," Aiden had said, his voice dripping with condescension. "In my line of work, I see this all the time. Sunk cost fallacy. You're emotional about your product, but from a purely fiscal standpoint, we don't throw good money after bad. It would be irresponsible of Robert to fund a failing enterprise. I've looked at the market trends you're talking about, and there's just no ROI there." He hadn't looked at anything. He didn't know the first thing about industrial software or hydro dam infrastructure. He just wanted to sound authoritative. I had left their house that night in tears. 2 weeks later, I found out through an aunt that Robert had gifted Melanie and Aiden $100,000 in cash as a wedding present to help them buy their first luxury condo. I didn't lose my company. I sold my car, moved into a cheaper apartment, took on freelance coding jobs at night, and kept the lights on just long enough to deliver the hydro dam project. It was the catalyst that launched my company into the stratosphere, but I never told them. I let them believe I was just scraping by. Now, 8 years later, I pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Whispering Pines estate. The guard checked my ID with a skeptical frown at my 5-year-old sedan before waving me through. I drove slowly up the winding, meticulously manicured driveway. The house was monstrous, a sprawling, modern farmhouse monstrosity with massive glass windows and a 4-car garage. It screamed new money, loudly and desperately. As I parked at the far edge of the driveway, taking care not to leak imaginary oil on the pristine pavers, the massive oak front door swung open. Aiden stood in the doorway. He was wearing a cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He looked older, slightly heavier, but the smug, self-satisfied smirk was exactly the same. He looked down the driveway at me, his eyes quickly scanning my modest car before flicking up to my face. "Well, well," Aiden called out, his voice carrying over the manicured lawn. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. You found the place all right, Aubrey. I know you're not used to being in the zip code. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The trap was set. They just didn't know they were already standing in it. The interior of the house was even more cavernous than the exterior suggested. It smelled of expensive cedar, floor wax, and the heavy, cloying scent of roasting turkey. High-end modern art, the kind that looked like a series of expensive accidents, hung on the pristine white walls. Robert and Julia were already seated by the massive stone fireplace, while Melanie was flitting about with a tablet, barking orders at two catering staff members in black uniforms. Aubrey, you're here. Finally, Julia said, standing up to give me a brief, perfunctory hug that didn't quite involve her chest touching mine. Put your coat in the closet, don't leave it on the chair. Nice to see you too, Mom, I said, my voice steady. Melanie didn't even look up from her tablet. Obs, don't go into the kitchen. The chef is very temperamental about his workspace. We're having a deconstructed heirloom pumpkin bisque to start, and he's plating now. I sat on the edge of a velvet armchair that felt like it cost more than my first 3 servers combined. For the next hour, I played the part of the quiet observer. I listened as Aiden and Robert engaged in a high-stakes game of who has the better portfolio. Aiden was particularly loud, dropping names of hedge fund managers and tech disruptors as if they were personal friends. The market is volatile, sure, Aiden said, swirling his drink. But if you have the right leverage, you can move mountains. We're actually looking into a private equity play in the industrial sector. Very high barrier to entry, but the margins are insane if you know the right people. He looked at me with a patronizing grin. You'd know all about the industrial sector, wouldn't you, Aubrey? How's what was it? The sensor business. Still doing the rounds at the construction sites. It's growing, I said simply, keeping my eyes on my lap. We've had some interest recently. Interest? That's cute, Melanie laughed, finally joining us. She sat next to Aiden, resting her hand on his knee. I told Aiden he should give you some pro bono consulting, but he's just so busy with the new estate. We're thinking of adding a subterranean wine cellar and a 6-car showroom. The architects are coming Monday. I watched them carefully. I noticed the way Melanie's eyes darted toward her phone every few minutes. I noticed the slight tension in Aiden's jaw whenever Robert asked a specific question about the financing of the new house. I wasn't just sitting there. I was investigating. A few months ago, when I knew the acquisition was imminent, I had done some due diligence of my own. I wasn't the same desperate girl who had begged for a loan. I was the CEO of a company that specialized in finding the hidden cracks in massive structures. And Aiden's wealth management lifestyle was full of cracks. I knew, for a fact, that Aiden's firm had been hit hard by a series of bad bets in the real estate market. I knew that this spectacular new property was actually leveraged to the hilt, with a balloon payment due in less than 60 days. They weren't just bragging, they were performing. They needed Robert to believe they were successful, so he would continue to act as their personal safety net. I felt a cold shiver of realization. They hadn't invited me here just to gloat. They invited me here because Robert was starting to ask questions, and they needed me, the failure, to be the distraction. If I was the problem child, then Melanie was still the golden one, regardless of her bank balance. You know, Aiden, I said, my voice cutting through his monologue about interest rates. I actually met someone from your firm last month. A man named Marcus. He mentioned things have been complicated lately. Aiden froze, the ice in his glass stopped rattling. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. Marcus is in a different department, Aiden said, his voice dropping an octave. He doesn't have the full picture. You shouldn't listen to office gossip, Aubrey. It's beneath you. Or maybe it's not, considering your usual circles. Just curious, I said, taking a sip of water. I hear the industrial sector is particularly unforgiving to those who don't have their own capital. The tension in the room shifted. Robert looked from me to Aiden, a flicker of doubt crossing his face for the first time. The predator was beginning to realize the prey had teeth. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Between courses of deconstructed food that tasted mostly of salt and pretension, Melanie and Aiden turned their sights on my life with renewed vigor. "So, Aubrey," Melanie said, dabbing her mouth with a silk napkin. "Since you're doing okay now, I assume you've finally moved out of that little apartment. I saw a TikTok about those buildings. Aren't they practically tenements?" "I like the location," I said. "It's close to the office." "The office?" Robert huffed. "You mean that rented floor in the warehouse district. I drove by there a year ago. It looked like a condemned building. Aubrey, you're nearly 40. When are you going to stop this charade and let us help you find a real position? Aiden has connections at a logistics firm. They need entry-level data entry people." I looked at my father. He looked so certain of my insignificance. He truly believed he was the arbiter of success in this family. "I don't think I'm suited for data entry, Dad," I said quietly. "Oh, please," Aiden scoffed, leaning back. "Let's be real, you've been playing at being a CEO for a decade. What have you actually built? A few sensors for some dams. We're talking about real business here. We're talking about an 8-figure lifestyle. You're playing in the sandbox while we're building the city." He gestured broadly to the room, the vaulted ceilings, the expensive art, the silent servers. "This house alone cost more than your company is worth, Aubrey. It's time to admit it. You failed, and that's fine. Not everyone is cut out for the high-stakes world, but don't sit here and pretend you're on our level." I set my fork down. The clink of the silver against the china seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "You're right, Aiden," I said, my voice calm and terrifyingly clear. "We aren't on the same level, not at all." Melanie rolled her eyes. Here we go, the "it's about the passion" speech. "No," I said, looking directly at Aiden. "It's about the numbers. You mentioned private equity in the industrial sector. That's interesting, because the largest acquisition in that sector happened just 3 days ago. A company called Apex Industrial Safety was bought out by the Global Infrastructure Group." Aiden's face went pale, his hand tightened around his wine glass. I heard about that. "A small niche player. Lucky timing, probably." "It wasn't a niche player, Aiden. They held the patents for the entire predictive algorithm used by every major hydroelectric plant in North America. They had a 94% market share in crane sensor integration." I leaned forward, the shadows of the candlelight dancing in my eyes. "The acquisition price was $190 million. After the initial venture debt was cleared and the employee pools were distributed, the founder walked away with $160 million. "How would you know the specifics?" Robert asked, his brow furrowed. "That information wasn't in the press release." "I know," I said, "because I spent the last 72 hours in a boardroom signing the closing documents. I know because the money hit my account yesterday morning. And I know because I'm the founder of Apex." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. Melanie's mouth actually fell open. Robert just stared at me, his glass halfway to his lips, frozen like a statue. Aiden was the first to move. He let out a sharp, panicked laugh. That's a good one, Aubrey. Really, you almost had me. But we know who you are. We know you're the girl who couldn't even scrounge up 15 grand for payroll." "I couldn't," I agreed. "Because my family refused to help. So I did it without you. And I kept it from you because I knew that the moment I had anything of value, you'd try to claim it as a family win while still treating me like a loser." I pulled my phone from my purse and slid it across the table toward Robert. On the screen was the bank confirmation. "Transaction successful, $160 million. Robert's hand trembled as he picked up the phone. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. His face went through a dozen different emotions: shock, disbelief, greed, and finally, a deep, crushing shame. "Aubrey, I had no idea," Robert stammered, his voice losing its booming authority. "Of course you didn't," I said. "You weren't looking. You were too busy watching Melanie spend the money you gave her." "Now, wait a minute." Melanie shrieked, her voice hitting a glass-shattering pitch. "This is a trick. It has to be a trick. You probably just found a screenshot online. There's no way you're a millionaire." You're Aubrey. You wear boots. You work in the mud. I own the mud now, Melanie, I said coldly. Aiden was sweating. Actual beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. He looked at the phone in Robert's hand as if it were a ticking bomb. Robert, don't listen to her, Aiden said, his voice cracking. Even if it's true, it's just luck. It doesn't change the fact that we're the ones with the long-term vision. We're still the ones who know how to manage this kind of lifestyle. Manage it? I laughed. Like how you're managing the second mortgage on this house, or the $300,000 line of credit you just opened in Melanie's name without telling her. Melanie spun around to face her husband. What? Aiden, what is she talking about? She's lying. Aiden shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched against the floor. She's trying to sow discord because she's jealous of what we have. I'm not jealous, Aiden. I'm informed, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. When I was preparing for the acquisition, my legal team did a background check on everyone even tangentially related to me. Standard procedure for high-value targets. They found your firm's internal audit. Aiden, you didn't leave your last job for better opportunities. You were asked to resign because of irregularities in your client accounts. I turned to Robert. Dad, the investment you gave them for this house, it's gone. It didn't go into the down payment. It went to cover the losses Aiden incurred while trying to short-sell tech stocks 3 years ago. This house is a shell. They don't own it. The bank owns it, and they're already 30 days behind on the primary note. The room descended into chaos. Melanie started screaming at Aiden. Robert was looking at the paper in my hand, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Julia was weeping quietly into her napkin. Is it true? Robert whispered, looking at Aiden. Aiden didn't answer. He just looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. He looked like a cornered animal. All the polish, all the cashmere, all the smug superiority had stripped away, leaving only a small, desperate man who had built his life on a foundation of sand. You think you're so much better than us now. Aiden hissed, leaning over the table. You think you can just come in here and blow up our lives. You're still nothing. You're a freak who got lucky with a computer program. I didn't blow up your life, Aiden, I said, standing up. I just turned on the lights. If you're standing in a mess, that's on you. I looked at my family, the people who had made me feel small for 38 years. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vengeful. I just felt finished. Dinner was lovely, I said to the room at large, but I think I've had enough. The silence that followed my announcement was heavy, but it didn't last long. As I turned to reach for my purse, the room exploded into a final, desperate symphony of noise. Melanie was now standing, her face a mask of blotchy red fury, pointing a trembling finger at Aiden. You spent my father's money to cover your losses. She shrieked. You told me we were buying this as an investment. You told me we were the it couple of Whispering Pines. I was trying to protect us, Melanie. Aiden barked back, his composure finally shattering. He looked at Robert, his eyes wide and pleading. Robert, listen, the market turned unexpectedly. It was a temporary setback. If I just had another $50,000, I could pivot. I could fix everything. Robert didn't look at him. He was still staring at the phone I had left on the table, the glowing numbers of my bank balance acting as a silent, mocking indictment of every decision he'd made for the last decade. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. The sharp, commanding patriarch had been replaced by a man who realized he had bet on the wrong horse, and he'd done so with a cruelty that could never be taken back. Aubrey, Robert said, his voice cracking. He reached out a hand across the table, his fingers grazing the silk tablecloth. Aubrey, wait. We need to discuss this as a family. This changes things. We can consolidate. With your resources and Aiden's, with your resources, we can save the estate. We can keep the family name intact. I stopped. I didn't turn around, but I felt the weight of his words. Even now, after everything, his first instinct wasn't to apologize for the years of neglect or the mocking rejections. His first instinct was to consolidate my success into his control, to use my 12 years of blood, sweat, and server room tears to pay for Aiden's fraud and Melanie's vanity. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. The family name, Dad. You mean the name you tried to distance yourself from every time I failed. The name you didn't want associated with eccentric software, until that software was worth 9 figures. Aubrey, please, Julia sobbed, finally finding her voice. Don't be like this. We're your parents, we love you. You love the version of me that just handed you a lifeline, I said. Where was this love when I was sleeping on a cot in a warehouse? Where was this family when I asked for a fraction of what you gave Melanie as a wedding gift? I looked at Melanie, who had stopped screaming and was now looking at me with a terrifying, predatory calculation. I could see the gears turning in her head, the realization that her loser sister was now the gatekeeper to the life she so desperately wanted to keep. "Obs," Melanie said, her voice dropping into a sickeningly sweet tone I hadn't heard since we were children wanting to swap chores. "We were just hard on you because we wanted you to succeed. It was tough love, and look, it worked. You're incredible, we should celebrate. Forget the soup, let's open the good champagne." The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. It was a master class in gaslighting. "It didn't work because of you, Melanie," I said. "It worked in spite of you, and there will be no champagne." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking firmly on the expensive wood floors. Behind me, I heard the sounds of the perfect family falling apart. Aiden was trying to grab Robert's arm, Robert was shaking him off, and Melanie was beginning to realize that the catering staff was still standing in the corner, having witnessed every sordid, embarrassing detail of their downfall. I spent the night in a hotel in the city, the kind of hotel I never would have dreamed of booking a week ago. I sat on the balcony, watching the lights of the skyline, feeling a profound sense of peace. The Whispering Pines estate was 3 hours away, but it felt like it was on another planet. The fallout was swift and definitive. Within a week, the news of the Apex acquisition was officially released in the major trade journals, complete with my photo. There was no hiding anymore. My legal team, acting on my instructions, kept a close eye on the situation in Connecticut. Because I had the resources, I made a few strategic phone calls. I didn't want revenge in the sense of causing physical harm, but I wanted justice. I ensured that the bank holding the note on Melanie and Aiden's house received the full internal audit report regarding Aiden's past employment. They didn't wait for the 60-day balloon payment. They initiated foreclosure proceedings within 14 days. Aiden's wealth management career was over. The irregularities I had uncovered were referred to the proper regulatory bodies. He wouldn't be managing anyone's wealth, not even his own, for a very long time. Melanie called me dozens of times. She sent emails ranging from hysterical apologies to vitriolic threats, claiming I was tearing the family apart. I blocked her on everything. I heard through a distant cousin that she and Aiden had moved into a small, 2-bedroom rental, the very kind of tenement she had mocked me for living in. Robert reached out once. He didn't call, he sent a handwritten letter. He didn't ask for money, which I suppose was his last shred of dignity. He simply asked if we could start over. I sat in my new office, a beautiful, sun-drenched space in a building I now partially owned, and read the letter. I thought about the $15,000 loan. I thought about the 3 Christmases spent alone. I thought about the steel-toe boots comment. I didn't reply. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, especially when the other side only wants to cross because their own land is on fire. I used a small portion of my fortune to set up a foundation. We provide low-interest bridge loans and mentorship for female founders in the industrial and hardware sectors, the unglamorous businesses that traditional banks and arrogant fathers often overlook. I spend my days talking to women who are sleeping on cots and building sensors in the mud. I tell them that they aren't failures, and I tell them that the people who mock them are usually just afraid of how far they'll go. As for me, I still wear my boots when I go on site. But now, when I walk onto a hydro dam or a construction project, I'm not there to beg for a contract. I'm there because I own the company that makes the world a safer place. I stood up from my desk, looking out at the city. The tremor in my fingers was gone. The hollowness in my chest had been filled with a quiet, steady strength. I was Aubrey, I was a founder, and for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely home.